Has it been months or even years since the breakup, and yet they're still on your mind? You've done the blocking, the journaling, the deleting of photos. You've convinced your friends, maybe even yourself, that you're over it. But you're not. Because late at night, when your mind is finally quiet, you still think of them. You still have dreams of them, maybe even dreams of them telling you everything you've always wanted to hear. Their absence still lingers like a perfume that won't wash off. And what's worse, you're not just missing them, you're missing who you were when you were with them. You're missing the version of life you thought you were building together. And that's the part no one talks about. We treat heartbreak like it's supposed to have a quick timeline. Like after a few months you should be fine. Like going out more, downloading an app, or keeping busy should just make it all disappear. And when it doesn't, you start to wonder if something's wrong with you. But what if I told you? You're not crazy. You're not broken. And this pain, it might be trying to teach you something sacred. This video isn't about blaming yourself or blaming them. It's about understanding why the pain still feels fresh, why you can't stop wondering what could have been, and how to gently start letting go, not just of them, but of the illusion they represented. Let's begin. So let's talk about it. Why you haven't moved on. Why even after months or years they still pop into your head randomly. Why certain songs still sting. Why your stomach drops when you see someone who looks like them. Why your heart still races when you hear their name. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you're obsessed. And it's definitely not because you're stuck in the past for fun. There's something deeper going on. See, when we go through a breakup, especially one that felt significant, we're not just losing a person. We're losing a version of ourselves that existed with that person. We're losing the future we imagined, the holidays, the anniversaries, the trips, the milestones. Even if things weren't perfect, your brain was building something and suddenly it's gone. It's not just heartbreak, it's grief. And grief doesn't work on a schedule. You don't cry for 3 weeks, take a vacation, and bounce back like nothing happened. Sometimes grief hangs out quietly in the background of your life, like a browser tab that never fully closes. You might be laughing with friends, having a great day, and then boom, a memory hits you out of nowhere, and you feel it again. The ache, the questions, the weight. It's confusing, it's frustrating, and worst of all, it can be really lonely, because no one really talks about this kind of heartbreak, the kind that lingers, the kind that keeps coming back, even when logically you know the relationship wasn't right, even when everyone else has moved on, including them. Here's the truth no one says out loud. You're not missing them. You're missing what you thought you were going to have. You're mourning the fantasy, the story, the emotional security you thought was finally yours. And when something ends without proper closure, or when it ends suddenly or messily, your brain doesn't know what to do with it. It keeps trying to solve the breakup like it's a puzzle. It replays every moment, every message, every fight, every kiss. It asks, was it my fault? Was there something I could have done? Did they ever love me? And that loop is exhausting. You might even be dating someone new or multiple people and still feel stuck on your ex. And you feel guilty for it, ashamed even, because everyone around you seems to move on so quickly, like they just cut ties, reinvent themselves, and bounce into new relationships without looking back. But for you, it's not that simple. Why? It's not that. Because you didn't just love that person, you attached to them. Maybe they made you feel seen in a way no one else had. Maybe they made promises that no one else had, or maybe, just maybe, they activated a part of you that desperately wanted to feel safe, wanted, or chosen. And here's where it gets psychological. When we're deeply attached to someone, especially if we have anxious attachment patterns, our brain doesn't just experience a breakup as sadness. It experiences it like a threat, a loss of safety, a loss of identity, a loss of control. Your nervous system doesn't care that your ex was emotionally unavailable or inconsistent. It remembers the rush of being held, of being seen, of being wanted. And when that disappears, it creates a craving. A craving that looks like love, but is actually a trauma response. It's the emotional equivalent of withdrawal. Your brain is literally detoxing from a chemical cycle it got used to. The highs of affection, the lows of distance, the dopamine from a text, the crash when they go cold. You weren't just in love, You were chemically looped into the experience of hoping, chasing, and waiting. That's why time alone isn't enough, because if the root emotional need wasn't healed, the wound stays open, and the longer it stays open, the more you start to believe that it means something about you. You might start to think, maybe I'm just not the kind of person people love long term. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I messed it up. But that's not the truth. That's the pain talking. That's the emotional injury rewriting your story. Let's be real. If you haven't moved on, it's not because you're broken. It's because that person represented more than just a partner. They became a symbol of what you thought you finally had, a symbol of feeling loved, a symbol of finally being chosen. And when they left, or when the relationship ended, so did the story you told yourself about what your life was supposed to look like. You're not clinging to them. You're clinging to hope, to the identity you built while being with them, to the idea that maybe this time, love would finally work out for you. And I want you to know that's okay. That hope came from a beautiful place. It came from a version of you that still believed in love, in connection, in forever. That version of you doesn't need to be punished. They need to be understood. So if you haven't moved on yet, pause for a second. Not to judge yourself, but to ask yourself, so what exactly am I still holding on to? Because it might not be the person. It might be the feeling they gave you, or the person you got to be when you were loved by them. And that's not silly, that's human. But here's the shift. What if the love you felt wasn't proof that they were your forever, but proof that you are capable of loving that deeply, of feeling that much, of showing up with that much heart? And what if that love, your love, deserves to be returned to you? To the person who waited, who tried, who stayed. To the person watching this video right now still hoping for peace. You don't need to move on overnight, but you do need to stop blaming yourself for not being over it yet. Because this kind of pain, it's layered, it's old, it's tied to things you might not have even uncovered yet. But you will. And when you do, it won't just be about moving on from them. It'll be about moving back into yourself. There comes a point, maybe a few months in, maybe a couple years later, when you stop telling people that you still think about them. Not because you don't, but because you're embarrassed that you do. You start to believe that everyone else has moved on from their breakups effortlessly, that you're the only one still lying awake at night, wondering what could have been. And so you start hiding it, even from yourself. You tell yourself, it wasn't even that deep. They didn't deserve me anyway. I'm over it. But deep down there's a bruise that hasn't healed, and you're scared to touch it, because every time you do, it brings up a wave of emotions that feel way too big for the situation. You think, why am I still so affected by this? Why can't I just let it go? And most of all, what is wrong with me? But here's what I want to ask you in return. What if this heartbreak isn't really about them? What if the reason you still care, still obsess, still replay, still ache, has very little to do with the actual person, and everything to do with what they triggered in you? This isn't just a breakup, it's an emotional flashback. When someone touches the deepest parts of us, especially those parts that were never fully loved, nurtured, or understood growing up, it's not just about attraction. It's about emotional recognition. It's about familiarity. Maybe they reminded you of someone. Maybe they felt like home in a way that was both comforting and chaotic. Maybe they made you feel small, desperate, and needy, yet you couldn't walk away. If that sounds familiar, this isn't just heartbreak. This is a resurfacing of old emotional wounds. Let's talk about childhood, because the truth is, many of us are not grieving a breakup. We're grieving the loss of an emotional fantasy that was keeping our childhood wounds quiet. Here's what I mean. If you grew up in an environment where love was inconsistent, conditional, or earned, you might unconsciously be attracted to people who offer that same pattern. They pull you in with intensity, chemistry, or connection. But just as quickly, they withdraw. They send mixed signals. They make you question your worth. They become cold, distant, or unpredictable. And instead of walking away, your brain locks in harder, because this dynamic feels familiar. Your inner child thinks, if I can just make this person love me, then maybe I was always lovable. But you don't realize this at the time. You just think you're in love. You just think this connection is unlike anything you've ever felt before. You just think they're your soulmate. But what's actually happening You're caught in a cycle called limerence. So what is limerence? Limerence is not love. It's not even healthy attachment. It's a state of obsessive emotional fixation on someone, usually someone who is emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, or ambiguous about their feelings. It often comes with intense longing and fantasizing, intrusive thoughts about the person, idealization of them despite clear red flags, emotional highs and lows based on tiny signals, a text =sign euphoria, silence =sign despair, the feeling that they're the only one who could make you happy. Sound familiar? That's because limerence often forms when a person gives you just enough hope to keep you chasing, but not enough safety to let you rest. And here's the kicker. People who experienced emotional neglect, abandonment, or inconsistent love growing up are far more likely to develop limerent attachments. Why? Because your nervous system learned early on that love is something you earn by proving yourself, by being good enough, by trying harder, by staying loyal even when it hurts. So when someone triggers that pattern as an adult, your brain doesn't register danger. It registers familiarity, and familiarity to the inner child feels like home, even if it's emotionally unsafe. You're not in love, you're in a pattern. One of the most painful truths to accept is that sometimes we weren't really in love with them. We were in love with what they represented. We were in love with the version of ourselves we thought we could finally be. We were in love with the idea that this time someone would stay. That this time someone would finally see us, choose us, and never leave. But when that person leaves, or never shows up in the way we hoped, it reactivates every old wound from childhood. I wasn't enough. I'm too much. I must have done something wrong. If I had just been a little more perfect, they would have stayed. And now you're not just grieving the relationship. You're reliving the emotional confusion you felt as a child. You're trying to make sense of abandonment all over again. You're trying to fix what's already gone, because deep down, you couldn't fix it back then either. Limerence feels like love, but it's actually a mirror. Here's the most important thing to understand. Limerence feels like the most powerful, soul-shattering love you've ever experienced. But more often than not, it's a mirror, not a match. The person you're obsessed with is just reflecting back to you the places inside that still need healing. They activate your desire to be chosen, because deep down you've never fully chosen yourself. They make you feel like your value depends on being loved, because that's what you internalized growing up. They trigger your fear of rejection because you were never emotionally safe to begin with. And so your brain forms this false logic. If I can just win over this one person, then I'll finally feel whole. But the real work isn't about making them love you. It's about understanding why you thought they ever held that power in the first place. You're not weak, you're wired. Let me say this plainly. You're not pathetic for still caring. You're not weak for replaying the memories. You're not crazy for missing someone who didn't treat you well. You're simply wired for attachment, and when those attachment systems were shaped by inconsistency, criticism, or emotional distance in childhood, your adult relationships become echoes of that early pain. That's why this heartbreak feels like a collapse. That's why it doesn't fade after a few weeks. That's why it hits you in the gut, in the chest, in the identity. Because this person wasn't just a person. They were the symbol your nervous system clung to, hoping finally for resolution. But here's where you get to break the cycle. The moment you recognize that this pain is not about the one who got away, and is actually about the parts of you that never felt fully seen or safe, that's when you take your power back. Because now the goal isn't to make them return, it's to turn inward, to look at the part of you that still needs to be told. You are enough, even if no one texts you back. You are lovable, even if someone couldn't handle your heart. You are whole, even if the fairy tale didn't work out. This heartbreak is not here to destroy you. It's here to awaken you. If you've made it this far, I want you to pause for a second and really give yourself credit. Because facing this kind of emotional truth is not easy. It's far easier to distract yourself, to jump into the next situationship, to pretend you're fine, to say, it wasn't that deep, and scroll through life pretending the ache doesn't still live in your chest. But you didn't do that. You're here, still listening. And that says something about you. It says you're ready, not just to forget them, but to remember yourself. Because the goal here was never just to move on. The goal is to wake up, to come back into alignment with who you were before the wound and who you were always meant to be. Healing starts by telling the truth, especially to yourself. And the truth is, a lot of what you've been calling love has really just been emotional survival. You weren't loving them freely. You were hoping they'd fix something inside of you that never felt whole. You were hoping they'd prove to you that you were worth staying for, that you were lovable after all, that the parts of you that were rejected in childhood were finally acceptable to someone. And that's not love. That's a cry for safety. That's a nervous system in distress trying to anchor itself to a person who made you feel temporarily seen. So the first step in healing is gently separating the fantasy from the reality. Not to shame yourself for getting attached, but to finally stop betraying your truth in the name of false hope. Because if you look closely, there were red flags. There were moments where you felt anxious, unseen, confused, small. There were emotional needs that went unmet, again and again, and yet you stayed, hoping that your loyalty would eventually be rewarded with certainty. And that part of you, the one that stayed and stayed and stayed, they don't need your judgment. They need your love, because that part of you is still frozen in fear. Afraid that if you let go, you'll be left with nothing. Afraid that if you stop hoping for them to come back, you'll lose the last thread tying you to the feeling of being loved. But you're not actually losing anything when you let go. You're just waking up from a dream. And the real you, the one who's been buried under years of heartbreak and self-doubt, is still there, waiting to be seen. What if this heartbreak is your invitation back to yourself? What if every moment you spent longing for someone else was actually a quiet call to finally choose you? Not the performance version of you, not the version that's always strong or chill or cool or easy to love, but the messy, emotional, deeply feeling version of you who just wants to be held, seen and told, "You don't have to prove anything, I'm not leaving." Because that's the love you were always chasing. And here's the wildest thing. You thought they were the source of it, but they were just the trigger. The source has always been you. So how do we begin letting go? Not by force, not by pretending, not by dating someone new just to prove you're over it. We begin by facing the parts of ourselves we abandoned in order to be loved. Ask yourself, where in the relationship did I silence my needs to keep the peace? Where did I ignore my gut to avoid being abandoned? What red flags did I explain away because I didn't want to start over? What version of myself did I become in order to feel safe? Write it down, speak it out loud, not as a way to beat yourself up, but to reclaim your power. Because when you can name the places where you shrunk yourself to fit into someone else's world, you can finally begin to expand again. And that's where freedom lives. Not in pretending you don't care, but in no longer needing someone else's love to feel like you matter. Replace the fantasy with truth. The reason it hurts so much to let go isn't just because you miss them. It's because you miss the story you were telling yourself about what your future looked like with them. You miss the version of your life where things made sense, where your love had a home, where you weren't floating in uncertainty. So instead of trying to destroy the fantasy, honor what it represented, and then choose to create a new story, one rooted in truth. Because the truth is, they weren't consistent. They didn't meet your emotional needs. They gave you hope without action. They felt good sometimes and devastating most of the time. You became addicted to the highs and blamed yourself for the lows. You deserve more than that. And you will only start to believe that when you stop negotiating with your worth. Healing is about becoming the person you needed during the relationship. It's about becoming the version of yourself who doesn't beg for clarity, who doesn't wait for someone to finally choose you, who doesn't accept breadcrumbs because they remind you of cake. It's about remembering that your love is a gift, that your presence is a privilege, and that anyone who can't see that, who makes you question it, is not someone you need to keep chasing in your head. You don't need to keep reopening the wound just to see if it still bleeds. It does, but it won't forever. Because your pain is not permanent. It's a message, a signal that something inside you is ready to shift, that the version of you who stayed quiet, small, patient, and hopeful is ready to speak up. And you can either keep hoping someone else will come back and validate you, or you can start becoming the one who validates yourself. Your freedom lives on the other side of radical self-honesty. You don't heal by pretending they didn't matter. You heal by finally admitting that you matter more. You don't move on by pretending the connection wasn't real. You move on by realizing that the realest part of the connection was the part you brought to it. Your depth, your tenderness, your desire to love fully. That was never theirs. That was yours. And it still is. Now it's time to give it back to yourself. If you've made it all the way here, I want you to take a deep breath. Not because everything is suddenly fixed or healed, but because you've just made a decision that changes everything. You've chosen to look inward. You've chosen to get honest. You've chosen yourself. And that's not just courageous. It's the beginning of real healing. Because healing doesn't come from forgetting the past. It comes from finally understanding it. Not just what happened, but what it meant to you. Why it hurt so much. Why you held on for so long. And what part of you was silently begging to be seen all along. Start here. 5 journal prompts for moving on. Set aside 20-30 minutes and let your thoughts pour out without judgment. Let the truth surprise you. What emotional needs was I trying to get met in that relationship? Was it safety, validation, a sense of purpose? When I picture myself with that person, what feelings do I miss? And what patterns do I ignore? Look for where your mind idealizes versus where reality fell short. What version of myself did I become just to feel loved by them? Be honest about how much of yourself you abandoned to keep the peace. Who would I be if I stopped trying to earn love and started expecting it to meet me where I already am? What would my life look like if I only allowed in relationships that made me feel safe, chosen, and at peace? These questions aren't here to hurt you, they're here to free you, because clarity is the first step to release. And once you release the fantasy, you make space for something real. Here are 7 affirmations to rewire your inner narrative. Read these daily. Speak them into the mirror. Say them when the sadness creeps in or the urge to reach out rises. Let them become your new truth. Just because they couldn't love me doesn't mean I'm unlovable. I deserve love that doesn't make me question my worth. The right person will never make me beg for clarity. Missing someone is normal. Going back to what broke me is not. I choose peace over chaos. I choose wholeness over fantasy. Every day I return more and more to myself. My love is not a weakness. It's a superpower, and one day it will be met with the same strength. Healing happens slowly, almost invisibly at times. But these words plant seeds. Say them enough, and you start to believe them. Believe them long enough, and you start to live them. Final message. You're not starting over, you're starting true. Let's end on this. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're not stuck. You're just in the process of becoming you, without the noise, without the fantasy, without the fear of not being enough. You are not meant to be chasing love, proving your worth, or shrinking yourself just to be tolerated. You are meant to be chosen, freely, fully, and without confusion. And that starts when you choose yourself. This heartbreak, it's not your end story, it's your wake-up call. And somewhere down the line, you're going to look back at this pain with so much clarity and realize it was never about getting them back. It was about getting you back. If this video resonated with you, tell me in the comments, what truth hit you the hardest today? Or simply write, I'm choosing myself. Because I want to hear from you. I want this to be more than a video. I want this to be a community. One where people are done chasing love that hurts. One where we hold each other through the hard and remind each other what we deserve. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Not because it's just another channel, but because every video here is made to help you feel seen, grounded, and more connected to who you really are. If you're on a journey to heal, grow, and stop settling for almost love, this is your space. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back anytime you need a reset. You're doing better than you think, and your future self is already proud of you.